Hello, I am the Script Doctor and welcome to the channel. Star Trek Picard continues to be a strange beast. How is it possible for a Star Trek show to become mostly forgettable, and yet when it isn't, the most memorable moments are stupid, horrific, or confusing? Somehow, this show is a convoluted mess that connects androids, the Tal Shiar, introduces the Zhat Vash along with two pseudo-clones of Data in a pair of twins that are somehow also Data's daughters, who are in danger of being destroyed by the aforementioned Zhat Vash, as they uncover a conspiracy within the Federation that has involved Picard because the first twin that was activated went searching for him because it was part of her programming. Yeesh. But with all those things thrown at us, I can't help but ask, why should I care? With Star Trek Picard, I still have not seen the writers present anything resembling what is at stake. So far, at best, the only stakes we have are regarding Soji being killed, but we barely know anything about her. She's as plain and faceless as a stormtrooper. That's not the actor's fault, that's the writer's fault for not developing her beyond being an objective for Narek. Without any character development to further or define the stakes, Picard is essentially a show about a 96-year-old man pursuing a 20-year-old woman, which seems more like a sitcom premise than one suited for science fiction. And I bet if all the padding of each episode was removed, you could show these stories inside of 22 minutes. Let's see if I can break down this show faster as I go over Episode 6, The Impossible Box. Damn, that title really doesn't line up well with the whole 96-year-old man going after a 20-year-old woman premise, does it? Please be advised that this review will contain spoilers. If you don't want to be spoiled, please feel free to return to my review after having seen the episode. Unlike previous episodes, instead of a flashback, we get a dream sequence from Soji's perspective. When the little Soji makes her way into her father's lab, she wakes when he barks her name, a little unsettled. Is it the dream that causes this reaction, or the creepy Romulan spooning her from behind? Why are these two still together? Wasn't she upset with him for suggesting her arrival to the cube was fake? She inferred that he didn't trust her and stormed off. There was no further action taken to rectify that situation, so how the hell did these two end up together again? She came off as pretty insulted last episode and now she's back in bed with him trying to get the creepy guy to tell her his real Romulan name. I laughed out loud from this scene because as soon as she asks him about the name Romulans reveal to the one they love, he's getting out of Dodge. Speaking of dodging subjects, Agnes Girardi is dishing out some crap regarding Maddox's death. Apparently he died based on complications and his heart couldn't take the stress. Picard buys it hook, line, and sinker, which is ridiculous. First, Girardi may be a doctor, but she's a cyberneticist, not a surgeon, and is giving Picard a medical explanation. Asking Girardi about biology is like having a computer programmer set a broken bone. At the time of this recording, there really isn't an app for that. She's not really qualified. Hell, one of the greatest doctors in Star Trek had a repeating shtick about his qualifications and what he can and can't do.
I'm a doctor, not a bricklayer. I'm a doctor, not an engineer. No, I'm a doctor, not a mechanic. I'm a doctor, not a coal miner. I'm a doctor, not an escalator. Spock, give me a hand.
Yet, Picard believes her reasoning. Why? She was the last person to be with Maddox. Hell, she kicked Picard out of sickbay moments before she killed him. Picard should be putting on his Dixon Hill hat and digging for clues, investigating the logs, talking to the EMH. Hell, Girardi's a cyberneticist. She could have hacked the EMH to say exactly the same thing she told Picard, thus creating more mystery about Maddox's death and compelling him to look further for answers. It would be a good bottle episode to explore. Add in some stakes regarding their arrival to the cube, have Picard suspect that whomever killed Maddox could kill Soji once she's brought aboard, so he has to determine who among the crew is a traitor. We would have dramatic irony as the audience would know it was Girardi, but we could also explore flaws and situations where Picard could suspect anyone else. He could suspect Raffi because she's drinking and smoking drugs again. He could suspect Rios because he's developing feelings for Girardi and maybe was jealous of Maddox's return. It wouldn't be Elrond because he has nothing to contribute, so he'd be in the position of Picard's partner to bounce off ideas and clues as they investigate. You can also bring up the idea of stopping the ship until they find out who the murderer is, but because Soji is still in danger aboard the cube, stopping the ship would give more time for the Zhat Vash to enact their plans for Soji. It puts Picard between a rock and a hard place. It creates real urgency and he has to work quickly. But as interesting as this fictional episode I'm conjuring up is becoming, it's sadly not what is in the show. Instead, we get Picard accepting Jurati's poor reason, followed by him reflecting on the Borg and triggering some latent PTSD from his encounter. He returns to his study where he brings up images of the Borg as research, I suppose, but really, the reason we have this moment is as transparent as this computer screen. It's only so they can do this cool shot of Picard staring at a flipped image of him as Locutus, so on the reverse we can see it overlay with his old self. That's it. They don't use it to add any new information. They don't use it to set up any danger of Picard going to this cube. It's only there for a single effects shot. After the opening credits, we are introduced to Rios kicking a soccer ball around the main deck, where he is interrupted again by Jurati. They decide to make out because, well, I don't know. Because Rios hasn't seen another woman besides Raffi in what, a decade? And the only other interactions he has are with holographic images of himself? I don't buy the action. Jurati then assumes she's going to sleep with him, stating that she's never been with a captain of anything before. First, is this how it works in the 24th century now? You kiss someone for a few seconds and from there you go straight to sex? No room for romance or flirtation? Just kiss and then bone? Second, wasn't she in love with Bruce Maddox? She killed him moments ago and now she's ready to jump in the sack with Rios? What does that say about her and how she views relationships? Finally, what does it say about Rios? He can't possibly not know that Maddox's death had an impact on Jurati, and his approach is to bang her on his ship? It's without compassion. It's without setup. Sorry, but this scene is not set up for them to like each other. She guilt trips him for being annoyed with her. If you want to put these two together, that needs to be explored in more than a scene where she displays a lack of knowledge about space and a few moments of Rios encouraging her to operate the transporter and admire his pimp costume. There needs to be some real honest interaction to develop these two characters together. As Jurati drags Rios off to bang out her feelings, Narek returns to his quarters where his sister is playing with his box. They debate about Soji's ability to dream and what that could mean, eventually allowing Narek to prove his point that he's close and should continue his mission. It is essentially a break between Picard's scenes so we can gain a better understanding of the relationship between these two aside from an incestuous one. When we do go back to Picard, they're on approach to Romulan space and need to gain clearance in a few hours or else be in violation of galactic treaty. In order to do so, they have to drag Raffi out of her drunken stupor to convince a friend within Starfleet to produce diplomatic credentials for Picard. This scene is the most contemporary exchange between characters the show has had so far. Raffi is playing into her flaws as if there's something to joke about. Her officer friend is not even being polite with her discussion with Raffi. The writers are trying to convey that these two are old friends and formality is not required. But it is a completely needless scene because it contradicts its own universe. If Romulus has been destroyed and the species are refugees, why is there still a neutral zone? If the Romulans still have an infrastructure to maintain the neutral zone treaty, why were they shown as helpless in the previous episodes? If the neutral zone is still a thing, then that would mean that much of Romulan culture and society is still strong enough for violation of said neutral zone to have consequences. So the Romulans need the Federation help to evacuate, but the Romulans and the Federation are still upholding the terms of the Neutral Zone Treaty? If that is the case, how would Federation ships going to evacuate planets in Romulan space do so without violating that treaty? Are they all given temporary passes for this situation? If this were a real Star Trek show, the Neutral Zone Treaty would be dissolved in favor of allowing aid to the Romulans. But now I'm even more confused, because according to this scene, the Romulans could view Picard's entry to their space as an act of war. But how could the Romulans respond, or even engage in a war, if their homeworld and society are in shambles due to the supernova? If there is still infrastructure, then why was that former senator on the refugee planet not still a senator? Why was that planet falling apart? Why aren't the Romulans able to recover and rebuild their society? If their home planet was destroyed and billions of Romulans displaced, how would there still be a risk of war for crossing the neutral zone? What means do the Romulans have to be a threat to Starfleet or the Federation in a warlike situation? This entire exchange appears to me that the writers forgot what time period the show takes place in along with the state of the Romulan people. These types of inconsistencies occur when writers don't define the rules and state of their world within their story. So, we're back to this type of scene, where Raffi gets these diplomatic credentials for Picard so they don't start a war, which the Federation would obviously win, or maybe they won't because no one watching the show or writing the show could consistently define the state of the Romulan Star Empire. I thought it was all but destroyed during the past 5 episodes, but if the neutral zone is still a thing, then I guess it isn't. But now that Raffi has achieved her goal, and at the cost of one of her last friends, how does Picard react? With applause. That's right. After just witnessing Raffi cash in her last favor and doing it while stoned, Picard's response is to clap. He shows no compassion, no empathy. He gives her no lecture about her choices or offers to listen to her of her strife. To see a character like Picard ignore a person who is suffering is so unbecoming. No wonder this show calls him JL, because that action is not Jean-Luc. From here, we get a few really quick exposition scenes to bridge to more exposition scenes. The first is with Soji and Narek, where he tells her that all her calls to her mother lasts exactly 70 seconds. The second is with Raffi telling Rios that she has a son who is expecting a daughter that she'll never get to meet. The third is back with Soji, where as she speaks with her mother, she starts to drift off. She tries to stay awake by stabbing herself in the hand, but that doesn't work and she passes out. Suddenly, I find myself actually able to relate to Soji now, as this show is also trying to put me to sleep. As Picard's ship approaches the cube, Rios delivers exposition regarding the credentials he was authorized, and Picard starts having flashbacks to his time as Locutus. Elnor assumes he's able to join Picard aboard the cube, but the credentials are for Picard and Picard alone. He orders Elnor not to follow him and transports over to an empty section of the Borg cube, where there is not a soul in sight to greet him or help him acclimate to the situation. No Romulans, no scientists, or representatives from the Borg Reclamation Project. No one. While Picard is left alone, Soji awakes and starts scanning all of her possessions to find out that everything she owns, her clothes, her photos, her journals, are only 37 months old.
Bum bum bum.
Picard wanders the empty cube alone and in the dark, which is really strange. One would think that a facility used for research would be incredibly well lit and also active with people. But for dramatic effect reasons, the cube retains much of its original aesthetic. As a result, Picard experiences some more of that PTSD and is caught by 2X Borg, preventing him from falling off a platform. From there, Hugh greets Picard and the two embrace. Hugh leads Picard through the cube and exposits about why he's the director of the program because of the lessons he learned aboard the Enterprise. What is strange is that Hugh is reassuring Picard that he's not Locutus and helping him with the Borg cube. It is supposed to be a reversal to what Picard and his crew did for Hugh, but it doesn't feel honest to the character. Picard was assimilated for a short time, a period of days. In this show, he's 96 years old. While those days may be traumatic, he's had more time than any other ex-Borg to adjust to life beyond assimilation. If anything, Hugh should be seeking his knowledge and experience to help the ex-Borg transition back to a life of freedom from the collective. But instead, Picard has become a weak shell of what he once was. It is not even Picard who instigates the reason for why he's on the cube. Hugh offers his help and Picard tells him of Soji. Hugh puts the pieces together that Soji's recent time on the cube along with a dashing Romulan spy, and Picard's arrival would suggest she is in trouble. Seriously? Dashing? What's dashing about a hairy, malnourished Romulan whose sister is way too into him? He may have secrets, but he's far from adventurous, which is a significant part of what makes someone dashing. Is it the accent? The fact that he doesn't do anything with his time? I'm genuinely curious what the allure would be. Soji reveals to Narek that all her possessions are only 3 years old, and she has no explanation as to why. Narek suggests it's memory implants and uses this speculation to encourage her to partake in a form of meditation exclusive to Romulans. Do we see this meditation right away? Nope, we have to have another scene with Hugh and Picard that feels like it should have come before the previous Hugh and Picard scene. You see, in the previous scene, Picard wants to find Soji. When that scene ends, we as an audience expect the next time we see these two, they are closer to finding Soji. But instead, what we have here is them wandering through a section of the Reclamation Project, seeing the work that Hugh is doing, and not thinking about the need or urgency of finding Soji. It feels like they're on a detour or going backwards to the goal of Picard's visit. It's only at the end of this scene that the writers remember what Picard is supposed to be doing here, and they tack on Hugh checking a log and discovering that Soji called in for the day. Should that check not have been the first thing Hugh did when Picard asked about her? He may no longer be Borg, but given our experience with 7 of 9, should Hugh not retain a little bit of efficiency when it comes to his job and those that he works with? If anything, the moment he learned Picard wants to see Soji, he should have brought up his holographic tablet and seen that she called in and went to her quarters. But instead, Hugh assumes she's going to be at work and takes Picard there only to discover that she's not. It is such a messy sidestep away from the story, a scene used only for exposition and to implant the idea of Picard using his free time to advocate for ex-Borg rights because, after all, those assimilated by the Borg are victims, not monsters. That idea is a great premise for an episode or story arc in something like Star Trek. Not this iteration of Star Trek, but a more traditional Star Trek show, one that explores a dichotomy between different characters that were freed from assimilation, some that try to live new lives after assimilation versus those that dwell on the trauma of assimilation. It would be a great way to explore victims and their path to recovery. As a writer, it breaks my heart to see good ideas be discarded for a story about an old man chasing after a young woman. But this type of random introduction of ideas that don't play out happens when there isn't proper leadership through a stable and strong showrunner. After Picard's revelation about the Borg, we segue into the Jumanji room. For the second time this season, Narek tells Soji to remove her boots. Someone on this show has a foot fetish. From here, he reveals his true name. It is pronounced Ryan, but it sounds a lot like Ryan. Are the writers trying to troll Star Wars fans? Let's not speculate on that right now. Soji is placed on the board and closes her eyes where she easily recounts her dream. There is no mental technique, no mind meld, no drink or drug to take to help her achieve this state, just the closing of her eyes. Or perhaps the stench from Soji's exposed feet is inducing this mental state. Who knows? We're not really shown how this Romulan meditation occurs. It just happens. While she started this journey with her eyes closed, they are now open and she's staring at the path as she narrates her way through her childhood home. I'm even more so disappointed as I'd much rather have seen her try to navigate this path with her eyes closed, having her focus on the images to tell Narek and having Narek guide her along the path. Doing it that way would have conveyed a form of shared trust. Soji is trusting Narek with her memories, and in order for Narek to maintain that trust, he has to guide her safely in this room without her falling off the path or walking into a wall. It would also come with a type of double meaning, as Soji would be blindly trusting Narek with her body and mind, not knowing that her body and mind is exactly what Narek has been exploiting since they met. Too bad the writers of Star Trek Picard don't think beyond the surface of their own ideas. The memory recounting is broken with a scene of Picard and Hugh examining Soji's trashed quarters. Picard suspects that Soji is close to discovering that she's an artificial life form and asks Hugh to locate her on the cube. If he could do that now, why didn't he do that to begin with? He has this technology at his fingertips, literally. And instead of instantly bringing up the information Picard needs, he wastes 2 scenes giving Picard the dime tour of the cube and showing him all the work he's doing instead of helping him achieve the very goal he offered to help with. Back in the Jumanji room, Soji discovers a wooden doll version of herself and that she's on a planet with 2 red moons and lots of lightning. Apparently, that's all Narek and his sister need in order to find her homeworld. From there, Narek locks Soji inside the room with his toy box. It opens and releases a slow-moving red toxin. As he weeps over his decision to kill Soji, she activates and punches through the wood floor into the metal scaffolding of the Borg cube, where she escapes into the vents like John McCain in Die Hard. What baffles me is why Narek is using this method to execute Soji. It's so slow and inefficient. It clearly gave her enough time to escape. If Narek and his sister know of her capabilities, why would they not use Thalaron radiation, the weapon introduced in Star Trek Nemesis? Or hell, why doesn't Narek have his acid tooth that he can spit on Soji and disintegrate her? Okay, maybe spitting is a little taboo, but why not use it while he's kissing her? Maybe he disintegrates his lip, but that can be repaired. It's the only weapon we've seen set up with the Zhat Vash, and to use it in such a way would be really cool. But instead, he uses a slow-moving radioactive gas. Why? Well, we've seen the answer to this before in another episode. Because the script said so. The writers need Soji to find Picard, but also need her to reveal where she was made. The writers put themselves into a corner they could not cleverly write out of, so they had to craft a means to kill Soji that would not be quick enough to do the job, but instead give her enough time to escape. They could have done it differently. They could have had Picard and Hugh close in on her and interrupt the meditation before Narek could deploy his poison. Hell, why not have the Romulan guards capture Hugh and Picard, throw them into the room with Soji after she has revealed the planet she was on, and have Narek beam out of the room after triggering the gas? A shield is raised so the three cannot escape, and Soji then has to bust through the floor to save herself, Picard, and Hugh. That situation would put us into a more thrilling chase scene where these three characters will have to make their way through the cube to an area where they can achieve transport. It also allows us to avoid that awful exchange in the reclamation room where Picard pleads with Soji to come with him. In that scene, Picard attempts to convince Soji to trust him in a very pathetic manner. He's nervous, almost at a loss for words, as if he doesn't know what he's doing. He's not showing a conviction of someone who came out this way for a reason. He's not speaking in a confident or succinct manner to convince this frightened young woman to trust him. But somehow, this nervous behavior Picard displays is enough for Soji to follow him and Hugh as they make their way to a secret chamber in the cube. But does Hugh close the secret entrance behind them after they enter? Nope. He leaves it open for anyone following them to stumble upon. One cannot argue the entrance to this room can only be opened and closed from the outside. First, that would be inefficient for the Borg. And the second reason I'll get to in a moment after I describe the contents of this room. This is the Queen's cell, a secret area of all Borg cubes that contains a spatial trajector from the Sicarians, essentially Star Trek's answer to Stargate with a massive range of 40,000 light years. Its purpose in the cube is to act as an emergency escape for the Borg Queen. That's it? The Borg have this amazing technology that can send them instantaneously anywhere, and they use it as a means of escape instead of a means of attack? This is a technology that shrinks the galaxy, much like how the automobile or airplane shrunk the world. Journeys that would take days, weeks, or years now only take seconds. And the Borg use this technology not to conquer, but to flee. So now the second reason as to why not being able to close this room off behind you is not an argument. This spatial trajector could link to other Borg cubes. It is essentially a more advanced transporter and plays by the same rules of a transporter with the added bonus of an extreme range. So if the Queen left Cube A and transported to Cube B, she should end up in that cube's Queen cell. And if that is the case, she would then need to leave that cell to move around the new cube. Speaking of fleeing, Picard informs Raffi that they can escape and to meet them on the planet Nepenthe. Before they can set a course, Rios asks where the kid went. 3 Romulans find Picard, Soji, and Hugh because Hugh didn't close that door behind him and they're trapped. See what happens when you leave a secret entrance open for your enemies to find? But only for 2 seconds because Elnor appears behind the Romulans and slices them up. Soji hears more guards approaching. Hugh states that the portal is almost ready and that he can hide their travel path so that they cannot be traced. Picard tells Elnor to come with them through the portal, but he chooses to stay behind and cover their escape, which he doesn't have to do because there aren't any enemies in range to threaten their escape. Also, Hugh can still close off the entrance to the Queen's cell. But no. We don't get anything that smart, because these writers have never written action before, so while they know from memory that a person will have to stay behind to hold off an oncoming enemy, they forget or perhaps never realize that the enemy needs to be present for that action to be justified. Picard and Soji go through the portal, and that is the end of the episode. As more episodes air, it's getting harder and harder for the writers to convince those still holding on hope for this series that there is a story worthy of being told. All they are doing is adding another sentence to that convoluted recount of the series I opened this review with. And sadly, that's probably all we're going to get with the remaining 3 episodes left. Just another sentence that doesn't really add or clear up anything that is going on in this show. Essentially, the odds of the writers being able to answer the question, why should I care, are becoming lower and lower with each new episode. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe. If you have anything to add to this episode, please leave a comment below. Thank you for watching, and never forget, it all starts with the script.